Welcome back. It is a Thursday, and you know what that means. The great Matt Taylor, the voice of the Indianapolis Colts, joins us along with Dustin Schutte. Matthew, how are you, brother?
I'm good. What's going on, fellas?
Just hanging out, waiting for you to bust out on your job. But that's how far away is the first game?
The first preseason game, I believe that date is August 13th. It's a Saturday.
Those don't count.
Yeah. Well,
is there anything worse than an NFL preseason game? I'm sorry, you can't answer that, but yeah, that's.
Let me just answer that question. Let me answer that question politically by saying that the month of August, training camp and preseason games, like that entire month, that period of time is its own season. You know, get through the month of August because you got 90 players and 180 guys that could potentially see the field, in a game between both teams. Yeah, it's a lot of work. It's a lot of work, and it's almost shocking, to be honest with you, when you go from 90 guys on a roster and training camp every day, and then all of a sudden, almost 40 guys are gone, and then they're no longer on the roster, they're no longer on the team, they're no longer on your mind, so to speak, once the season starts. And then you go out to that first practice in the regular season and you see the team, you're like, where did everybody go? The actual team seems tiny in terms of overall numbers. When you go from 90 to 53, and you're like, oh yeah, this is the regular season now. So it's its own season, and it's weird when it's over because it's like, man, where did everybody go? But then you start playing regular season games, and then obviously it just sort of fades from your memory that month.
Well, looking forward to it as well. A season that a lot of people are looking forward to. All the fans with the new quarterback, Matty Ice in there, Jonathan Taylor coming off of a great season. Saw where he got screwed in the Madden deal, got ranked 4th, and I could see people making an argument, not by what Jonathan Taylor did last year, because he led the league in every freaking category except for sacks. It looks like, but I know that Henry's he's a badass running back. He's a unique beast. God, would I not ever have wanted to tackle him in my entire life. Nick Chubb, I understand that he's a really good running back, but how in the holy possible hell does anybody in their ever freaking mind rank Christian McCaffrey in front of Jonathan Taylor as a running back? I've never seen something as idiotic in my life.
Yeah, I'm not a big video game guy, but listen, hey, whatever motivates you and gives you inspiration, just latch onto it and go. So if it's as silly as a video game rating, then hey, if that gets you fired up, then use that to your advantage. A guy like Darius Leonard obviously will latch on to just about anything to, make that chip on his shoulder even bigger and allow him to play better. And I don't know if Jonathan Taylor has seen this or cares. Probably not, because he's an unbelievable human being and finds motivation in more sophisticated places. But you're exactly right. Like I haven't played Madden since 2005. Because quite frankly, the game got too hard for me to comprehend. When it graduated from like 2 to 3 buttons, and then there was like, I had to hit the button behind the controller to scan the quarterback view. Like at that point, I was out. I couldn't handle it. But yeah, the video game rating system where Jonathan Taylor is the 4th best running back in the NFL after the season that he put up last year, that's certainly laughable. But I'm a guy that stays pretty far away from Madden ratings, to be honest with you, because that's what we do in the dead months of July before training camp, is we get miffed about Madden ratings before we start seeing football players back on the field again.
Well, just to give folks a reminder, Jonathan Taylor led the league in rushing yards, rushing touchdowns, rushes for more than 20 yards, and more than 40 yards last season. That reminds me back in the days when Indiana had oh gosh darn, who was Tevin Coleman, who led the world in rushes from every category. But yeah, I mean, he was just a man that stood out, and that is a slap in the face, and I hope it does motivate him, because if he has a better season than next season than he did last year, and you got Matt Ryan in it, things would seem to be very good for the Colts.
Well, I mean, Jonathan Taylor is the complete package. He can block. He's an unbelievable human being. He's a great teammate. So it's not as if he's a problem in the locker room or a diva, or a look at me guy that, backs up all of his great play on the field by being, a hard guy to get along with. That could not be further from the truth. I mean, the stat that just blows me away on Jonathan Taylor, and there's a lot of them, so don't get me wrong, but last year, his yards after contact number alone would have led the NFL. He had more yards after contact than number 2 in the NFL had total rushing.
Wow. And
he led the NFL. He led the NFL in rushing by like 500 yards. So it wasn't even close to him being the rushing champ. There was no doubt that he was the best running back in the NFL last year. And he can catch the ball to the backfield. He can block on third down. He can pass protect. So he does everything. I mean, and the guy runs when he's got the ball in his hand. He's reached like 23 miles an hour on the field. I mean, he's unbelievable. And I think he's more of an impressive guy off the field than he is on the field, which is absolutely saying something. He's my favorite player of the last 10 years in a Colts uniform because of what he represents to the team and how he represents himself for the team and inside the community.
RG asked, do you re-sign Taylor?
Well, he's got a little bit of ways to go, thankfully for the Colts. He's still on
well, there you don't have to worry about it then.
He's still on a rookie contract, so he's got 2 more years before they have to worry about, assessing, what he's worth and projecting, how good he'll be on a second contract. So
and that is hard, but that will be a difficult time for the Colts, because running backs in the NFL, while you've got some good ones, man, it's their lifespan is not the longest in the NFL, I guess is the best way to put it.
Well, I think the best way to put it, to piggyback off of you're exactly right. Jonathan Taylor is going to be the focal point of this offense, and rightfully so, and he's one of the best players in the NFL at his position. But if you're making a list of the top 2 to 3 most indispensable Colts, I don't think he's on that list. And I just think that's by virtue of the position that he plays. Like if the hypothetical question that I'm asking or presenting is, if the Colts don't have this guy, if they don't have X, Y, or Z, how much of in a difficult spot are they in? I'm not saying Jonathan Taylor is replaceable, because he's not, because he's that good. But the Colts running game, I still think, would be serviceable, and I think it would still be top 3rd in the NFL if he wasn't in there by putting another running back in there, whether that's Nyheim Hines or Phillip Lindsay. If he then turns into the bell cow running back, if Jonathan Taylor gets hurt, I think your most indispensable Colts are the guys that are the most difficult to replace because of the position that they play. Quarterback, defensive end, number 1 wide receiver, Michael Pittman Jr. So that's not a knock on Jonathan Taylor. I just think I say that more so because of the position that he plays at running back.
And I think when you look, Matt, at the way the league has gone in this the era of the quarterback and passing offenses, for Jonathan Taylor to do what he did, to me, makes it more impressive. But I think it also speaks, now that they have Matt Ryan, a lot of the pressure should not be should be taken off of his shoulders. I don't think he's going to be maybe he'll still be the focal point of the offense, but at the same time, now you have a little bit more of that balance. So I think he can be, maybe not put up the same kind of numbers, but I think in the long term, that's probably good for the Colts. I mean, am I off base there?
No, Not at all. It's funny you say that and bring that up because we talked about that exact same thing this week on our podcast. I urge people to check that out, Colts.com or excuse me, wherever you get podcasts. It's the official Colts podcast. And I brought that exact same thing up. It would actually be, it sounds like a negative thing, but I think it'd actually be a good thing for the Colts if Jonathan Taylor is not rushing for 1,800 yards or flirting with 2,000 for the season. Right. Because last year, just think about it. He accomplished all these great things last year, 1,800 yards and led the NFL in touchdowns and, did so much and meant so much to the Colts offense. And yet they were 9-8 and missed the playoffs. And, Taylor became the first rushing champ in the NFL to miss the postseason since 2011 when Maurice Jones-Drew led the league with the Jacksonville Jaguars. So if Jonathan Taylor has a less impressive statistical season individually, I don't think that's a bad thing for the Colts, because if Jonathan Taylor is more around 1,100 yards or 1,200 yards, that probably means that Matt Ryan's throwing for 4,100 yards and hopefully, is flirting with 25 to 30 touchdowns. That, I think, means more balance for the Colts offense, because last year everybody knew the Colts were going to run the ball. Teams were stacking the box, and yet they had a hard time winning with play action and, winning matchups outside the numbers and taking advantage of the running game and capitalizing on that in the passing game. They just couldn't do it. I think they only threw for over 200 yards twice in the last 8 games of the season last year. So hopefully with Matt Ryan at quarterback, who is, proven over the course of his career to be just surgical in terms of completion percentage, ball placement, decision-making, I think the ball is going to be out this year. I think the offense is going to look like it did in 2020 with Phillip Rivers. 2.5 seconds, diagnose, get the ball to playmakers, backs, tight ends. Get yourself in favorable down and distance. Let the playmakers make plays. Get the ball in their hands as fast as possible in space. I think that's philosophically what this offense is going to look like next year. Obviously, Jonathan Taylor is still going to be the focal point of it. But I don't think it's a bad thing. I know this is a long-winded answer, but I don't think it's a bad thing for him to go from 25 carries for 150 yards down to 15 to 18 carries for 110, 120 yards. But the Colts put up 30 points, and they're more balanced in the passing game, and thus defenses can't key in or hone in on just one aspect of the Colts offense.
I think go ahead, Justin.
I was going to say, I almost view running backs in the NFL today like a pitcher. You've almost got to have like a pitch count for them. You don't want them to take too many hits because you want their longevity to last. And I think that's the point with Jonathan Taylor. But one other question I wanted to ask, Matt, was the past, I don't know, maybe 2, maybe 3 years, it seems like the Colts have almost played to the level of their competition. They've beaten some really good teams, but they've also lost to some teams, obviously the last couple games of the season last year, that they should have beaten. Is there an emphasis this year with that, or is it just, can a coach focus on that and say we're playing really well against the teams we should play well against, but when we're playing, a 2-15 Jacksonville team or 2-14 Jacksonville team, we're not living up to expectations? Can a coach focus on that sort of thing to provide more consistency across the course of the season?
Well, actually, if you look at the tenure of Frank Reich, I actually think that those last 2 games last year against the Raiders and Jaguars, where the Colts were probably favored on paper. I know they were favored on paper to beat Jacksonville in Week 18, that final game of the season. So coming up short in those games, actually, those were sort of the outliers in the Colts not being able to sort of take care of business and beat teams that they are supposed to beat or that you would think they would be favored against and beat that type of competition. I think more so the Colts have struggled to consistently the last couple of years prove themselves against the elite competition. Now they've done it. They have signature wins the last couple of years against elite teams like the Buffalo Bills last year. You go back to 2019, they beat the Chiefs. In 2020, they beat the Packers. So they've got marquee wins, but just consistently beating those playoff teams, that to me, I think has been more of the the issue than taking care of business against the teams that they're supposed to beat. And again, I say those last 2 games of the season last year were sort of the outliers in that regard. And obviously, we're still talking about those games because of what they meant for the end of the season and missing the playoffs in disappointing fashion. But I think that going forward, we've talked about this in the past, those AFC South games at the start of the season next year. It's the season, the schedule is so front loaded with division games. I actually think that's a good thing because of the way last season ended. You need to have a chip on your shoulder. And because you're playing 5 of your first 7 games against the AFC South right out of the gate, you got to get off to a good start, because if you don't, there's not a lot of chance for recovery late in the season inside the division. And that's the easiest way to make the playoffs is win your division. And it's a very winnable division still, with Jacksonville and Houston kind of figuring out. They're in the, whatever you want to say, year 1, year 2, year 3 of a rebuild, still trying to figure out what they have at the quarterback position in both situations. So I actually like the fact that the Colts have to have a sense of urgency and play with a chip on their shoulder at the beginning of the season. 2 road games in the division out of the gate right away. I think it kind of sets the tone. If you win those first 2 games on the road, you're 2-0 in the division. You're 2-0 to start the year. You haven't started this season off on the right foot the last couple of years. It kind of sets yourself up psychologically on what this season's going to be about. It's taking care of business and be in the driver's seat by week 8, week 9 around Halloween, when you've played all those AFC South games. Not that you can go on cruise control after that, don't get me wrong, but you can know that you're in control, you're in the driver's seat to win the division and have a really good kind of stranglehold on the AFC South by week 8 by taking care of business and putting a good effort forward in the first half of the season in the AFC South.